The Cotswolds woke early for the first eventing competition of the summer. Mist clung low to the lush green hills, and the paddocks rang with the excitement of trainers, family, and neighbors, all gathering along the rails to watch their favorites ride. Above the crowd's cheerful clamor, one name came up again and again: Arthur Ainsworth. He was a quiet legend here, a horseman whose hands could calm even the wildest yearlings. And today, like so many days before, he was astride Shadow, a black gelding with fire in his eyes and strength in every step. Freya Ainsworth, Arthur's only daughter, moved along the outer fence, camera in hand, nerves coiled in her belly. She watched her father and Shadow warming up, noticed the way her father whispered to his horse, his hands gentle on the reins. She saw how Shadow's ears flicked at every word, every breath, their bond clear for all to see. Around them, other riders and trainers offered Arthur respectful nods or clapped him on the shoulder, some with genuine admiration, a few with envy, barely hidden behind polite smiles. Freya's heart fluttered as the announcer called her father's name. Dad always loved this part, she thought, remembering countless mornings spent at his side, mucking stalls and sharing dreams. The crowd cheered as Arthur and Shadow entered the course, and for a moment, everything felt just as it should. Right. Simple. Almost safe. The whistle blew. Arthur and Shadow launched forward, moving as one through the first few jumps, a pair in perfect harmony. Freya barely breathed as they cleared a tall gate, then a tricky stone wall, applause swelling behind them. She could see Arthur's focus, his back straight, his legs steady, his confidence contagious. Shadow responded to every cue, bold but measured, his stride stretching long and low as they thundered across the open ground. Freya didn't notice the first sign, just a quick twitch of Shadow's head as they rounded the third fence. But by the next jump, the horse's rhythm faltered, a sudden tension in his movement. Arthur steadied him, his voice low. "Easy, boy." But Shadow tossed his head again, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling. The crowd's cheers softened to uneasy murmurs. Freya's fingers tightened on her camera. What's wrong? Her heart pounded. Arthur urged Shadow forward, determined to finish, but the horse suddenly reared, hooves pawing the air. Arthur tried to bring him down, steady now, his voice calm even as the crowd gasped. For a split second it looked as if he would regain control. Then Shadow lurched sideways, panic wild in his eyes. Arthur, caught off balance, tumbled from the saddle, hitting the ground with a terrible, final sound that echoed across the field. Shadow bolted, galloping loose before a marshal caught his reins. The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Freya's legs went weak. She stood frozen, hands at her mouth, as the medical team sprinted onto the course. Time became a blur of shouts, hands, running feet. Someone held Freya back as she tried to reach her father. "Wait here," they said. But she barely heard them. The world shrank to a tunnel, her father lying motionless, Shadow trembling in the whispering crowd. She caught fragments. Was it the horse? Did you see how he snapped? Paramedics surrounded Arthur. Freya finally broke free and rushed to his side, her voice ragged. "Dad, please." He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. Shadow's reins dragged on the ground, his flanks heaving, eyes wild and confused. Arthur was gone. The announcement came quietly, almost kindly. "We're so sorry." But nothing about the moment was kind. The organizers approached her, faces grim, voices hushed. "It was a tragic accident, Miss Ainsworth. It happens. Sometimes a horse just loses his head." But the questions started almost instantly, first murmured among the officials, then more boldly from the other trainers. Shadow was always so steady. Wasn't he a bit odd lately? Did Arthur push him too far? Rumors blossomed and spread. Freya heard it all, every accusation, every sideways glance at Shadow. They blamed the horse, said his temperament was questionable, that he'd shown signs of anxiety. Maybe he's dangerous. Maybe it's time he was put down. Freya retreated home in a fog, her mind looping the accident again and again. She couldn't reconcile the Shadow she knew, the gentle, loyal companion, with the wild animal described in every new rumor. In the kitchen, surrounded by flowers and neighbors' awkward condolences, she thought only of her father's voice. "Trust the horse, Freya. Always listen to what he's trying to tell you. That night, unable to sleep, she walked out to the stables where Shadow stood alone. The horse lifted his head, ears twitching, and whickered softly at her approach. She pressed her forehead to his, tears soaking his mane. "I know you," she whispered. "You didn't do this. You couldn't." But doubt gnawed at her, fed by the relentless swirl of gossip and the official story handed down. A respected rider lost to a tragic, but ultimately simple, accident. Except it wasn't simple. Not to Freya. The details kept clawing at her mind, her father's recent unease, Shadow's strange restlessness, the tension in the stable that morning. None of it made sense. None of it fit the story the others wanted to tell. She promised herself, right there in the darkness, "I will find out what happened, Dad. I will clear your name." In Shadows. With that vow, a tiny spark of determination pierced the fog. The pain would remain, but so would her questions. In the echo of the empty stable, Freya realized that her journey had only just begun. The funeral for Arthur Ainsworth was quiet, dignified, and heartbreakingly small. The sun broke through clouds as neighbors, trainers, and old friends filed past Freya to offer their condolences. But every hug, every gentle hand on her shoulder, only made the loss sharper, the void wider. For hours after everyone left, Freya sat at the kitchen table surrounded by fading flowers and cold cups of tea, replaying the accident in her mind until she could barely breathe. The only constant comfort was the thought of Shadow waiting for her at the local training center, alone, no doubt confused, probably just as lost as she felt. But comfort was fleeting. That evening, as she slipped into Shadow's stall and rested her head against his warm flank, a stable hand appeared behind her, clearing his throat. "Miss Ainsworth, Mr. Higgins would like a word with you in his office." The manager's office was stuffy, filled with plaques, ribbons, and the smell of old leather. Mr. Higgins, the head of the center, looked older than usual, his hair more gray than silver, his shoulders weighed down by decisions that were never personal, but always necessary. "Freya," he began, not quite meeting her eyes, "I know you've been through hell, but there's been a lot of talk about Shadow since the accident." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The tone said it all. He continued, voice tight. "Some of the owners are worried. They've asked me to consider what's best for the center. Shadow, he's a risk now. We can't have an unpredictable horse here, not after what happened." He licked his lips, shuffled papers, avoided her stare. "We've already had inquiries. A few private buyers are interested in, well, the other option is to have him put down, humanely, of course. But I need you to make a decision soon." Freya felt her world contract, anger and disbelief pressing hard against her chest. "You want me to sell him? Or worse," she said, voice cracking. "After everything he's been through? After everything my dad did for this club?" Mr. Higgins winced. "It's not what I want, Freya, but the board is watching. There's insurance, and—" He trailed off, looking away. "I'm sorry." The conversation ended as quickly as it began. Freya walked out of the office, her head spinning, the chatter of the other riders swelling around her like a rising tide. "If it were my horse, I'd put it down. He could be dangerous, you know. Arthur was a good man, but he should have known better." She walked faster, pushing through the voices, out to the paddock where Shadow waited. He stood alone, ears flicked back, nostrils flaring with every unfamiliar scent. The world had turned against him overnight, and he didn't even understand why. She stroked his nose, whispered, "Don't listen to them, boy. I know you. I know you didn't mean for any of this." But the pressure mounted. Over the next 2 days, the calls kept coming. From the center, from distant relatives, even from other trainers. Some urged her to cut her losses, move on. Others, with softer voices, suggested that letting Shadow go would help her grieve, would let her finally close the chapter on the tragedy. By the third night, she couldn't sleep. She sat in her childhood bedroom, the one her father had painted a soft yellow, and stared at old ribbons and photos. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Arthur's smile, heard his voice. "You fight for what's right, Freya. Even when it's hard." Something inside her snapped. Or maybe it was something that had always been there, quietly waiting for its moment. She got out of bed, pulled on her boots, and drove through the dark to the training center. It was almost midnight, the air cold and still. She moved quietly through the barns, every step echoing in the silence. When she reached Shadow's stall, he nickered softly, eyes shining in the darkness. "Let's go home," she whispered. She found an old lead rope, clipped it to his halter, and led him outside. The truck and trailer her father had used for years sat at the far end of the lot, keys exactly where he'd always kept them. Her hands shook as she loaded Shadow, her heart pounding with fear and excitement. But when she finally climbed into the cab, a strange calm washed over her. She drove slowly, headlights sweeping over the winding lane to Ainsworth Farm. It was just past 2 in the morning when she pulled up in front of the old house, the porch light still broken, the whole property quiet and lonely. Shadow stepped out into the yard, head high, ears flicked forward as if he, too, remembered this place as home. Freya led him to the barn, flicked on the ancient lights, and settled him into his old stall. The familiar creak of the wood, the smell of straw and cedar, it all came rushing back. Shadow let out a long breath, his body relaxing for the first time in days. She sank down in the straw beside him, burying her face in his neck. "I won't let them take you," she promised. "I won't let them blame you." She spent the rest of the night cleaning the barn, scrubbing water buckets, tossing fresh hay. When the sun rose, she was still awake, her hands raw, her spirit blazing with purpose. The calls started early. Mr. Higgins, angry and confused. The police, politely concerned. Even the club's lawyer, threatening legal action if she didn't return the horse. Freya listened to them all, her answers simple. "Shadow is my horse. He's home. If you want him, you'll have to come through me." It didn't take long for the rumors to spread, first at the center, then through the village, then across every stable in the county. Some called her foolish, others reckless. But a few, just a few, called her brave. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and quiet encouragement. Arthur would be proud, they said. Don't let them push you around. Freya found herself standing taller, speaking more clearly, her fear hardening into resolve. The loneliness was sharp, but so was her determination. In the evenings, she would sit in the barn with Shadow, reading old journals of her father's, piecing together notes and memories. Each entry, each faded photo, each tiny detail became another thread in the tapestry of what she was beginning to suspect, a mystery that went deeper than anyone wanted to admit. She promised herself again, "I'll clear your name, Dad. I'll clear Shadow's too. Whatever it takes." The world outside grew harsher, the criticism louder, but Freya's faith did not waver. She had made her choice. She would fight for Shadow, for Arthur, for the truth, even if it meant standing alone against them all. And somewhere in the darkness, she knew, her father was standing with her, proud, unyielding, whispering, "That's my girl." The first morning back at Ainsworth Farm dawned cold and bright, the sky a hard blue over tangled fields and sagging fences. Freya stood on the back porch, coffee warming her hands, gazing across the land that had shaped every memory of her childhood. The old farmhouse loomed behind her, paint peeling, the windows smudged and empty, yet it still felt like the safest place on earth. She listened to the calls of starlings, the distant hum of a tractor, each sound another thread tying her to the past. Down at the barn, Shadow kicked his stall door, eager for turnout. Freya laughed softly, her first real smile in days. All right. I'm coming, boy." She grabbed the halter, led him out into the pasture, and watched as he shook himself, rolled in the dewy grass, then burst forward in a wild gallop, black muscles rippling, tail flying, hooves thundering over the ground. For a moment she saw the old Shadow, powerful, free, full of joy. She leaned on the fence, tears in her eyes. "That's who you are." But as the excitement faded, Shadow slowed, his head dropping, his gaze searching for Freya's reassurance. She climbed the fence and joined him, her hand finding the familiar groove between his ears. "It's us now," she murmured. "Just you and me." Inside, the farmhouse felt haunted. Every room held echoes. Her father's muddy boots by the back door, his battered mug in the sink, the faded calendar still stuck on the month of the accident. She wandered from kitchen to sitting room to her father's cramped study at the back, a place of dust and memory, sunlight slanting through half-closed blinds. She hesitated at the door. Her father's old desk was covered with scattered papers, dog-eared ledgers, and a few photographs. Arthur, in his younger days, standing beside Shadow after their first big win, both of them grinning at the camera. Freya's eyes lingered on the photo, her thumb tracing her father's smile. She sat down and pulled a leather-bound journal toward her. The cover was soft from years of use. Inside, Arthur's writing filled the pages. Feed schedules, weather notes, little stories about barn cats and show day nerves. But in the margins, darker thoughts had crept in. Shadow not himself after last shipment. Finch pushing cheaper supplement. Check label. Talk to Dr. Meller. Blood test results. Freya's brow furrowed. She remembered Finch, Arthur's so-called friend and business partner, always appearing at the farm with smooth words, quick deals, and a handshake that lasted a second too long. The more she read, the more she saw her father's growing unease, worries about money, odd feed deliveries, in the changing atmosphere at the training center. She turned to the battered laptop on the desk, fingers hesitating above the keys. The screen flickered to life, password required. She tried Shadow's name, her own birthday, the address. On the third try, it opened. Her father's desktop was a mess of folders, but one caught her eye. Private, she clicked. Spreadsheets of expenses, email threads with Finch, messages to Dr. Meller about blood work, and, buried in a subfolder, audio notes. Her heart thudded as she hit play. Arthur's voice, scratchy but clear. Met with Finch again. He's insistent about changing suppliers. Doesn't feel right. Shadow off after new feed. Need to document changes. She listened to every word, chest tightening with every mention of Finch, every worry about Shadow's behavior. Her father had been afraid of something or someone, and he had left a trail for her to find. In the days that followed, Freya made a ritual of returning to the study after chores. Each evening, she'd page through old calendars and receipts, scrolling through emails and replaying her father's messages. She pieced together a story of growing tension, a summer of strange shipments, mounting bills, and the quiet, suffocating fear that something in the world she trusted was turning against her. At night, she wandered the empty halls of the farmhouse, hearing her father's footsteps in every creak, his voice in every echo. She sometimes whispered back, "I'm here, Dad. I'll figure it out." Shadow seemed to feel the change, too. Each day, he grew calmer, settling into the rhythms of home, his coat shining, his eyes brighter. When Freya visited him at night, he pressed his nose to her shoulder, breathing her in, a silent promise between them. One afternoon, searching for a wrench in the barn, Freya noticed Shadow, pawing at a spot near the tackroom door. She knelt down, finding a loose board behind the feed bin. Underneath, wrapped in an old handkerchief, was a battered key. She stared at it. "What are you trying to show me, boy?" It fit the lock on an old trunk in the attic. A trunk she'd always thought was filled with her mother's forgotten clothes. Instead, it held folders marked with Arthur's handwriting, more ledgers, photos of Finch at the farm, and a single thumb drive taped to the inside lid. Back in the study, she plugged in the drive, breath shaking. The files were encrypted. She tried password after password until, finally, the word Shadow, 2022, unlocked the contents. Inside, Arthur's private records, detailed notes on every shipment, scanned letters, a series of emails flagged urgent, and a final voice memo. "If anything happens to me, Look after Shadow, and don't trust Finch. I think he's done something to the feed. I'm scared, but I won't stop fighting. Freya slumped in the chair, head in her hands. What did you see, Dad? What did you know? As the sky darkened outside and Shadow shifted restlessly in his stall, Freya understood that the accident was only the beginning. There was a secret, a lie, and a threat that still lingered over the farm. She looked around the study, at her father's life and work, at the photo of the two of them with Shadow. She whispered to the silent house, I'm not afraid. I won't give up. Not on you. Not on him. In the gathering dusk, Ainsworth Farm seemed to breathe with her, alive with hope and with warning. Freya wiped her tears, squared her shoulders, and turned back to the laptop, determined to dig deeper, whatever the cost. Freya barely slept. Each night at the old farm was a tumble of uneasy dreams and sudden awakenings, the wind rattling loose shutters and the floor creaking under the weight of memories. Even Shadow seemed restless, his hoofbeats echoing against the barn walls, his whinnies sharp in the lonely dark. Yet, every dawn, Freya rose with new purpose. The fragments she'd uncovered in Arthur's study, the ledgers, the emails, her father's trembling voice, refused to let her rest. They formed a puzzle she was determined to solve. After breakfast, she took her coffee to the cramped study, sunlight struggling through dusty glass. The room had become her war room, a scatter of journals, receipts, the old laptop humming. She opened Arthur's notebooks, paging through daily details. Hay deliveries, show results, notes about the weather. Searching for anything that didn't fit. Again and again, one name reappeared. Finch. At first, Finch was mentioned in passing, a casual partner, helpful, eager to cut deals, always offering a shortcut. But in entries dated just months before Arthur's death, the tone changed. Finch pressuring for cheaper supplier. Feels wrong. Next page. Finch angry, wants full control of club's purchases. Shadow on edge. After new supplement batch. Freya's fingers drummed the table, pulse racing. The same pattern appeared in Arthur's emails. She scrolled through digital correspondence. Finch's language always cheerful, but evasive when challenged. Trust me, Arthur. I'm just looking out for us. Let me handle the paperwork. Another. We can save so much if you just sign off. Freya pushed back from the desk, mind spinning. Her father had sensed something, some threat hiding in plain sight. She needed to know what it was. That afternoon, she called Dr. Mellor, the old vet who'd known Shadow since he was a foal. I'm worried, she told him. Did Dad ever mention Finch to you? Or say anything about supplements? There was a pause. Your father was troubled at the end, Freya. He asked for blood tests after that last shipment. I thought maybe it was just nerves, but his voice trailed off. Do you have those results? No, but I'll look. When the call ended, Freya dug through a pile of papers on the floor. Bills, test results, lab reports. At the bottom, she found a sealed envelope addressed in Arthur's bold handwriting to himself. Inside, a blood panel for Shadow, dated 2 weeks before the accident. There, under notes, Dr. Mellor had written, Unusual sedative detected. Source unknown. Freya stared at the page, her heart stuttering. He was right. There was something in the feed. She paced the kitchen, the page trembling in her grip. For months, everyone had insisted the tragedy was simple. Arthur lost control. Shadow panicked. End of story. But her father had known better. He'd suspected sabotage, and he'd been afraid to say it out loud. That night, as rain battered the roof, Freya set up the laptop at the kitchen table. She played Arthur's audio notes again, listening for details she might have missed. Finch was here late, after everyone left. Supplements delivered straight to tack room, not signed for. Shadow restless again. She pressed her hands to her face, fighting tears. You tried to warn me, Dad. I wasn't listening. Determined, Freya started a new list, a timeline of every strange event in the months before the accident. Odd deliveries, bills that didn't match, Finch appearing at all hours. Shadow's sudden anxiety. Each detail sharpened her focus, made her resolve harder. On the third night, unable to sleep, Freya roamed the barn, flashlight cutting through the gloom. She checked the feed room, sniffed every supplement bag for chemical tangs, ran her hands along the grain bins for hidden residue. Shadow watched her, patient, as if he understood her urgency. At the far corner behind the old tack box, she found a bag marked with a supplier she didn't recognize, one Arthur had never used before. The batch number matched the invoices in her father's ledger. She took a sample and made a note to call Dr. Mellor in the morning. By dawn, Freya was exhausted, but she had a plan. She sent the sample to the lab, wrote a careful email to D.I. Vance, the one person in the county she still trusted in the police, and printed out every email, every lab result, every page of Arthur's worried scrawl. When she paused for breath, she realized she hadn't eaten all day. In the silence, the weight of what she'd discovered pressed in. What if Finch knows I'm on to him? She tried to shake the thought, but couldn't. That afternoon, she left the farm for the first time in days, driving into the village to pick up supplies and drop off the sample at Dr. Mellor's office. As she walked through the market, she felt eyes on her, some sympathetic, others wary. She caught the tail end of a conversation near the feed store. Did you hear what happened at Ainsworth's? I always said that horse was trouble. Freya squared her shoulders and moved on, head high. But inside, anger burned. That night, she sat by Shadow's stall, telling him everything. Her suspicions, her fears, her father's secrets. The horse leaned close, blowing warm breath into her palm. We're getting closer, she promised. I won't let anyone hurt you again. She returned to the farmhouse and fired up the laptop one more time. In the deepest corner of her father's files, she found a password-protected folder labeled Evidence. Her hands shook as she typed guesses. Shadow's birthday, the farm's address, the date of the accident. On the fifth try, the folder opened. Inside, photographs of Finch meeting a delivery truck at midnight, blurry phone footage of him unlocking the feed room when no one else was there, scans of invoices with discrepancies in the supplement shipments, a voice memo Arthur had recorded late at night, Arthur's voice, tired but clear. If you're hearing this, something's gone wrong. Finch is hiding something. He's getting desperate. Watch the supplements. Protect Shadow. Freya listened, her eyes burning with tears and fury. I'm listening, Dad. I hear you. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Dr. Mellor. I tested the sample, he said quietly. There's a sedative. Just like last time. I'll document everything for the police. Freya thanked him, voice trembling. She hung up and stared out the window as the first sunlight touched the fields. The house felt less empty now, her father's presence strong in every corner, urging her on. She opened her journal and wrote, Dad was right. Shadow is innocent. Finch is the key. I have to finish what he started. Outside, Shadow whinnied, impatient for breakfast for another day. Freya smiled through her exhaustion, hope and anger forging into something like courage. We're not done yet, she whispered to the morning. Not by a long shot. And with that, the farm, haunted but healing, braced itself for the next battle in the quest for truth. The days blurred as Freya moved from one task to another, tending to Shadow, cataloging evidence, reviewing her father's emails, and scanning the farm for any trace she might have missed. The air around Ainsworth Farm grew thick with suspense, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Her resolve hardened with every new scrap of information, and so did her suspicion. The time for quiet grief was over. Now she would act. Freya knew she couldn't confront Finch openly. Not yet. He was too careful, too practiced at slipping through shadows and smiling through questions. If she wanted to learn the truth and protect Shadow, she would have to be smart. Careful, cautious. The whispers in her father's journals, the warnings in Arthur's emails, all pointed in the same direction. Someone in the equestrian world knew more than they were saying. She started by visiting the places her father had frequented in his last months. The local tack shop, the feed supply store, the bakery where he'd stopped every Saturday morning for a scone and hot coffee. She asked quiet questions, always wrapped in the armor of polite conversation. Have you heard anything odd about Finch? Did my dad mention any business deals that felt off to you? Did he ever talk about the supplements or complain about the club? The responses varied. Some people shrugged, offering nothing but condolences. Others hesitated, eyes darting, voices dropping low as if the walls might be listening. Old Mr. Danvers, who ran the feed store, leaned over the counter and whispered, "Finch is clever, that one. Got his hands in everything, you know." But Arthur didn't trust him at the end. At the bakery, Mrs. Oakley nodded toward a stack of unsold scones. "Your father always paid in cash. Said he didn't want anyone tracking his movements. I figured it was just old habit, but now, I don't know." At the tack shop, a young clerk looked up from repairing a saddle. "Finch?" "He's always around when something goes missing. Or when money doesn't add up." Freya's questions didn't go unnoticed. By the third day, she sensed the currents of the community shifting. Some people warmed to her, quietly offering advice or sharing old stories about her father's integrity. Others, especially those with close ties to Finch, turned cold or avoided her altogether. Late one afternoon, as she left the feed store, she felt eyes on her. A car sat idling at the end of the lane, windows tinted, engine humming. She hurried to her truck, trying not to look over her shoulder, but the unease clung to her skin. When she pulled onto the main road, the car followed for half a mile before turning away. That night, Freya lay awake in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction. Am I being paranoid? Or am I really being watched? She resolved to press on. I'm not backing down. She returned to the club, confronting the management directly. The boardroom was stiff with tension as she sat across from Mr. Higgins and 3 other members, their faces hard and closed. "I want to see the records for all supplement deliveries in the last 6 months," she demanded, "and I want to know who signed for them. My father kept his own records, and there are discrepancies." "I know Finch is behind this." Higgins shifted. "We've got nothing to hide, Freya, but you're stirring up trouble at a bad time." "You owe my father the truth," she said, cutting him off. "And you owe it to every horse in your care. I won't let this be swept under the rug." An awkward silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of the clock. She left with nothing but more questions and a burning sense of isolation. That evening, as she mucked Shadow's stall, her phone buzzed. A withheld number. She answered, heart in her throat. A voice, distorted and unfamiliar, hissed, "Stop digging, Freya. Some things are better left alone." The call ended abruptly. Freya's hand shook as she pocketed the phone. Fear surged through her, raw and cold, but she forced herself to breathe. "No, I won't be scared off." She wrote down everything she'd heard, every name, every time Finch appeared in conversation, every cold shoulder she'd received. The threats only fueled her resolve. She started locking the doors at night, keeping the lights on, double-checking the barn before bed. 2 days later, while filling water buckets in the barn, she noticed Shadow's anxiety spike. He tossed his head, pacing in his stall, ears pinned back. "What is it, boy?" She listened. Faint footsteps outside, a rustle near the feed shed. Grabbing a flashlight, she crept out, scanning the yard. Nothing. Only darkness and the hum of distant cars. But the next morning, she found footprints by the barn and a set of tire tracks in the mud that didn't match her own. She snapped photos and sent them to D.I. Vance, attaching a brief message. "I think Finch is watching me." The response was quick. "Be careful, Freya. Document everything. We're looking into him." The community itself was divided. Some stood by her, quietly supportive, dropping off fresh bread or checking in with a wave on the road. Others grew distant, uncomfortable with the attention. Rumors flew. Arthur's girl's lost her mind. She's obsessed. Maybe she's making it all up. But Freya pressed on. In her father's notes, she found a line she'd missed before, scribbled in haste. If something happens to me, Finch knows more than he's saying. Trust only Dr. Meller and Vance. One night, as she prepared for bed, a rock hit the kitchen window. She ran outside, heart pounding, but whoever had thrown it was gone. On the stone, a slip of paper. Enough is enough. Leave it alone. She stared into the darkness, jaw set. I won't run. I won't stop. Returning to the kitchen, she placed the note with the rest of her evidence, adding to the growing mountain of proof and warning. Each threat was another reason to keep going. As the week ended, Freya felt the pressure rising, the danger real and close. But she had changed too. No longer just Arthur's grieving daughter, but a fighter, standing for the truth with her father's courage in her veins. She stood in the barn with Shadow, brushing his mane. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Outside, the wind carried whispers of secrets, of fear, of a community on the brink. Freya listened, and in that hush, she heard something else, the promise of justice, growing louder with every beat of her determined heart. Every day, Freya became more cautious. She checked the locks twice each night, kept the curtains drawn, and made sure her phone was always charged. Each time the wind knocked a branch against the old farmhouse, she jolted awake, listening for footsteps outside or the hum of a car engine lingering on the lane. Still, she pressed forward, digging deeper into her father's records and every lead she could find. She had to. She owed Arthur, she owed Shadow, and she owed herself the truth. On a chilly Thursday morning, Freya spread Arthur's notes, ledgers, and USB drives across the kitchen table, hunting for anything she'd missed. The evidence felt like a map now. Lines of suspicion pointing to Finch, moments of worry about Shadow, references to tests, threats, late-night meetings, and deliveries that didn't fit the normal pattern. It was a web, and she was certain the center of it was Finch. She picked up the phone and called Dr. Meller, her hands trembling. I need you to look at something, she said. Dad kept samples from the supplement bags and left notes about strange results in Shadow's blood work. Could you test them again? Dr. Meller hesitated. Of course. Freya, bring what you have to the clinic. She packed the samples and drove into town, the box rattling on the seat beside her. The drive was tense, each car in her rear view, each glance from a neighbor, every lingering look at the petrol station. Was it paranoia? Or was Finch's network really this far-reaching? The vet's office was quiet. Dr. Meller took the samples, promising to expedite the tests. I remember your father's concern, he said. He was right to be worried. I wish I'd pushed harder. Freya's eyes stung. Me too, she whispered. Back at the farm, she returned to Arthur's study. Her hands moved almost without thinking, opening desk drawers, flipping through old calendars. She was searching for something, but she couldn't name what it was. A memory surfaced. Arthur, late at night, locking the tack room and muttering about never leaving important things in obvious places. She checked the usual hiding spots, false bottoms in drawers, loose boards under the windowsill. Nothing. She went outside, drawn by an urge she couldn't explain. The barn was chilly and dark, the air thick with dust. Shadow whickered as she approached, bumping her gently with his nose. I know, boy, she murmured. I miss him too. She walked the length of the barn, studying every inch. Her eyes landed on the horse box parked at the end of the yard. Its tires sunk into the mud, paint faded from years of use. Arthur had always been protective of the trailer, insisting it was locked every night even when the farm itself wasn't. Freya approached, found the key still hidden under a loose brick by the wheel well. Inside, the scent of old hay and leather filled her senses. She opened every compartment, bridles, boots, even a faded show blanket from a competition 10 years past. Finally, she noticed a panel near the floor that sat crooked, just enough to make her pause. She pried it open and reached inside. Her fingers brushed something smooth, an old cell phone, battery taped to the back. Next to it, wrapped in a handkerchief, a USB drive. Her heart raced. Dad, what did you hide from me? Back in the farmhouse, she powered up the phone and plugged the USB into Arthur's laptop. The USB was encrypted, but her father's usual passwords, Shadow 2022, the farm's address, didn't work. She closed her eyes and tried to think like Arthur. What did he always say about secrets? A sudden idea struck her. She typed, "Trust no one." The folder unlocked. Inside were dozens of files, receipts, photographs, notes about Finch, and a folder named Insurance. Freya clicked through, breath catching as she read the contents. Arthur had kept copies of insurance correspondence, screenshots of Finch's text messages urging him to file claims after Shadow's first panic attack, hints that money could be made if a high-value horse were put down and the policy collected. She scrolled further. There were audio files, too. Hands shaking, she pressed play. Arthur's voice came through, exhausted, wary, but clear. Finch keeps pushing. Says the club can't afford another scandal, that I should just let Shadow go. Keeps hinting that something bad might happen if I don't cooperate. But Shadow's not to blame. I know he isn't. Tears sprang to Freya's eyes. She listened to another file. Found sedative traces in Shadow's blood. Mellor's worried. Supplements all come from Finch's new supplier. Doesn't add up. She wrote everything down, each thread adding to her map. Suddenly, a knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. She froze. For a moment, only the wind answered. She grabbed her phone and approached the front door, peering out. No one in sight, but on the step lay a folded note. Last warning. Mind your own business. Her stomach twisted, fear sharpening her focus. I'm not giving up. She called D.I. Vance. Someone's threatening me, she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. I found proof. Audio, documents, everything. Finch is trying to collect insurance on Shadow. He's been pushing Dad for months. I need help. Vance's voice was calm. You did the right thing, Freya. Stay home. Lock your doors. We're sending someone by. The tension coiled tighter. She spent the night by Shadow's stall, blanket pulled around her shoulders, the horse dozing at her side. The farmhouse lights stayed on until dawn. When morning came, Dr. Mellor called. There's sedative in your samples, he confirmed. It matches the one in Shadow's blood from before. This was no accident. Freya closed her eyes, relief and fury swirling inside her. Thank you, she said. Armed with the final pieces, Freya spent the next day organizing everything for the police. Records, timelines, threats, audio files. She sent digital copies to D.I. Vance and kept hard copies in her father's old safe. But as the sun set, she realized she was no longer just reacting to tragedy. She was hunting truth, and in the silence of the farm, with Shadow watching, she felt her father's presence. Calm, steady, proud. We're almost there, she whispered. I'll see this through. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn doors and whistling through the trees. But the fear that had haunted Ainsworth Farm was breaking. In its place, hope, fierce, defiant, ready for the fight ahead. The wind howled around Ainsworth Farm, flinging rain against the window panes, but inside. Freya felt a focus so sharp it made the chaos outside seem distant. She paced the study, the USB drive clutched in her fist, Arthur's old phone, and the folders of evidence spread out before her like a chessboard. Every piece was falling into place, but the question was what to do next, and how much danger she was truly in. Her phone vibrated. It was D.I. Vance. I'm forwarding you instructions for securing the evidence, the detective said, her voice brisk. And I'm sending a tech to help extract all the data from your father's phone. If what you're describing is there, we'll have the leverage we need. Freya followed the emailed steps, compressing files, double-checking every folder, making digital backups, and uploading them to a cloud drive as Vance instructed. With every click, her anxiety grew. This wasn't just family business now. It was the kind of truth that shook communities. The rain eased by late afternoon, leaving the air cool and sharp. The technician arrived in an unmarked car, a young woman named Anna who offered a nervous smile and dove into the laptop with practiced hands. Can you access these audio files? Freya asked, passing over Arthur's phone. Anna nodded. Give me a minute. Freya waited, breath held, as the files loaded. Anna clicked open the first and turned up the volume. Arthur's voice filled the room, steady, measured, unmistakable. If you're listening to this, something's gone very wrong. I have reason to believe Alastair Finch is manipulating feed supplies, using sedatives, maybe worse. I've logged all supplement batches and deliveries in the attached spreadsheet. Shadow's recent behavior isn't natural. I have samples and vet results to back it up. I've refused Finch's offers to file false insurance claims, but he's been pressuring me hard. Freya squeezed her eyes shut. I knew it, she whispered. Anna glanced up. There's more. She clicked another file, this one a recording of a phone call. Arthur, you're making this difficult for both of us. Finch's voice, smooth and chilling. The club can't afford bad press. Take the payout. Put the horse down quietly. Nobody wants a scandal. Arthur's voice shook. I'm not killing my horse for money, and I'm not letting you poison any more animals, Finch. Finch's reply came, low and tight. You don't know who you're messing with. Accidents happen. Freya's jaw tightened as Anna scrolled through emails. Finch's friendly reminders became increasingly menacing, always with a layer of plausible deniability. There were photos, too. Finch meeting delivery trucks after hours, signatures on invoices that didn't match Arthur's handwriting, and notes on insurance policies taken out months before the accident. Anna finished the data dump. You have enough to bury him, she said quietly. They uploaded copies of everything to D.I. Vance. Within minutes, the detective called back, her voice fierce. Freya, this is the smoking gun. We're opening a formal investigation right now. Do not answer your door for anyone but police. And stay with friends if you feel threatened. Thank you, Freya said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. That night she slept for only a few hours, curled in an armchair near the front door, a heavy flashlight within reach. Outside, car tires crunched the lane twice. Both times, headlights flashed at the house before retreating. She called Vance both times, and a squad car soon appeared at the end of the drive, the officers staying visible until dawn. The next morning brought a new surge of energy. Word spread quickly through the equestrian community. A police investigation, suspicions about Finch, rumors of poison and fraud. Some people called to offer support. Others fell silent, their previous coldness replaced with anxiety. Sally Turner stopped by with pastries, her eyes wide. Is it true, Freya? Are the police really after Finch? Freya nodded. We have proof. Dad kept everything. It wasn't just an accident, Sally exhaled. I always knew something was wrong, but nobody wanted to cross Finch. You're braver than any of us. With Vance's encouragement, Freya gave a statement at the police station, providing every note, file, and memory she had. The officers listened with care and took her evidence seriously, but she could see the unease in their eyes. You've poked a hornet's nest, one officer murmured. Back at the farm, the tide kept turning. Some people who had once gossiped now sent texts of apology. A neighbor offered to help mend a fence. Even Mr. Higgins called to say he'd cooperate fully with the investigation. But not everyone was so supportive. That evening, as Freya led Shadow into the barn, she spotted a dark shape moving along the hedgerow. She called the police, her voice steady but her hands shaking. Someone's watching the farm. I can't see who. The patrol arrived quickly, sweeping the area, but found nothing. Still, the officers agreed to leave a car at the lane's end, lights flashing through the night. Freya moved through her days with new determination. Every threat, every warning note was now evidence. She kept her phone on her at all times, copied every new message or call, and wrote daily logs as Vance requested. Shadow, too, settled. Calmer than he'd been in months, as if sensing the tide finally turning. Then, one afternoon, the news broke. Alastair Finch had been arrested on suspicion of fraud, animal cruelty, and conspiracy. Local reporters swarmed the club and village, eager for comment. Freya ignored their questions, but she watched from her window as the police led Finch away in handcuffs, his eyes blazing, his mouth a thin, bitter line. Sally called, voice trembling with excitement. "It's over, Freya." They finally got him. Freya managed a weary laugh. "Not over yet, but we're close." That night, the farmhouse was peaceful for the first time in months. Freya sat by Shadow in the moonlit barn, running her hands along his neck. "We did it," she whispered. "We told the truth." In the quiet, she felt her father's presence, calm, proud, a silent witness to the justice unfolding. The long nightmare was breaking, replaced by the soft promise of healing. And as the wind settled and the stars glimmered above, Freya knew they had changed more than just a story. They had changed an entire community. The morning after Finch's arrest dawned bright and cold, with the Cotswolds shimmering under a late frost. Freya awoke before sunrise, the farmhouse unusually quiet, no more threatening calls in the night, no strange headlights sweeping over the yard. She made coffee, staring out at the fields silvered in dawn, letting the reality of what had happened settle in. The news of Finch's arrest spread rapidly. Headlines blared from every phone screen and radio, local businessman held in racing scandal, while neighbors and strangers alike sent messages of congratulations, sympathy, or curiosity. Some wanted to gossip, some wanted to apologize, some, most surprisingly, offered help. D.I. Vance was the first to call, her voice brisk but warm. "You did well, Freya. The lab confirmed everything. Fraud, sedative traces, falsified invoices. With the evidence from your father's records and the witness statements coming in, we have a solid case." Freya felt a wave of relief, tempered by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Thank you. What happens now?" Vance paused. "Now we press charges. There will be a full investigation. You might get called to give more statements, maybe even testify, but you aren't alone anymore. We're keeping an officer nearby, just in case." Freya's mind spun as she hung up. Alone? She had been, for so long. Now the farm felt less like an island and more like a stronghold, reinforced by truth, community, and, finally, justice moving in her father's name. The day unfolded in a haze. Reporters called, but she refused to comment, passing all questions to D.I. Vance. Sally and a few of the other neighbors dropped by with casseroles and fresh bread. They sat in the kitchen, voices hushed at first, then warming with each new detail. Sally shook her head. "I never trusted Finch. You did the right thing, Freya." Freya smiled faintly. "I only wish I'd seen it sooner." As afternoon light streamed through the dusty windows, two detectives arrived with more questions. They wanted details, her timeline, her suspicions, how she'd found the phone and the USB, what exactly she'd noticed in Shadow's behavior. Freya told them everything, her voice steady as she described Arthur's growing unease, the warnings in his notes, the night she'd found the evidence hidden away. They took careful notes. "Your father left you a trail," one detective said. "He knew you'd be brave enough to follow it." That night, Freya returned to the barn, Shadow lifting his head at her approach. He nudged her arm, warm breath mingling with the chill air. "We did it," she whispered. "We're safe now." But in the days that followed, the aftershocks of Finch's downfall rattled the whole community. The club issued a statement, promising reforms and a review of all insurance policies and supplement suppliers. The governing body for local eventing launched their own investigation. Freya watched as old divisions cracked open, some riders angry and embarrassed, others grateful for the reckoning. She found herself invited to a meeting of the club board. The room was tense, the air thick with apology and unease. Mr. Higgins, red-eyed and subdued, addressed her first. "Freya, on behalf of the club, I want to say, we failed you and your father. We should have listened instead of pushing you away." A ripple of agreement passed through the room. She straightened. "Thank you, but it's not about me. It's about every rider and horse who deserves to be safe. My dad gave his life to this sport. Don't let that be wasted." They promised change, a new code of ethics, more transparency, protections for whistleblowers. Freya believed some of them. She knew it would take time for trust to return. Back at the farm, the mood slowly shifted. Some people dropped their distance, bringing food or stopping for tea, sharing memories of Arthur. Others stayed away, still wary of what had come to light. But Freya held her head high. She had done what needed to be done. One night, D.I. Vance called again. "Finch is trying to negotiate a deal," she reported, "but there's no escaping this. You'll be called to testify. We have your back." Freya nodded. "I'm ready." In the barn, she sat with Shadow, the two of them silent under the stars. She remembered Arthur's words. "Trust your instincts, Freya, even if you stand alone." Now, she realized, she was no longer alone. She was surrounded by the memory of her father, by new allies, by the silent support of a horse who'd never let her down. The days grew longer, the frost retreating, the fields coming alive with the first hints of spring. Police cars no longer parked by the lane, but the sense of vigilance remained. Each morning, Freya checked the gates, walked the perimeter, and greeted her neighbors with a nod. Some evenings, she caught herself standing in the kitchen doorway, waiting for Arthur's voice, half expecting him to appear in the fading light. "You did well," she could almost hear. "I'm proud of you." The community began to heal. Rumors faded, replaced by gratitude for the truth. Shadow's reputation was restored, and more than once a child at the club asked if they could feed him carrots or help brush his mane. Freya welcomed them, glad to see the barn fill with laughter again. The day the trial date was set, Sally brought a cake and a card signed by the neighbors. "We're with you," it read, "all the way." Freya smiled, her heart full of gratitude and hope. She knew the hardest part was yet to come, facing Finch in court, reliving the pain, demanding justice not just for herself, but for Arthur, Shadow, and everyone who had suffered in silence. But as the sun set over Ainsworth Farm, Freya stood at the paddock fence, Shadow at her side, and watched the horizon blaze with light. "We're almost there," she whispered, "and we're not alone anymore." In that moment, surrounded by peace and the promise of a better future, Freya understood. This was not just an ending, but the beginning of something stronger. Something honest. Something free. The news of the investigation and Finch's arrest swept through the equestrian community like a sudden storm. The phone at Ainsworth Farm rang nonstop. Sometimes it was a neighbor, voice thick with relief or embarrassment, wanting to apologize for having doubted Freya and Shadow. Sometimes it was a journalist, pressing for details. Sometimes it was another writer, emboldened by Freya's courage, whispering secrets that had been too heavy to share until now. The headlines grew harsher with every day. Race scandal widens. More allegations against club sponsors. Insurance fraud at heart of local horse tragedy. Witnesses come forward as community rallies for Ainsworth justice. Freya turned most reporters away, her loyalty to Arthur's memory and Shadow's innocence outweighing any temptation to let the pain become gossip fodder. Instead, she focused on what mattered: preparing for trial, safeguarding the mountain of evidence, and supporting those who had finally found their voices. There were ripples everywhere. The club issued a public apology. With Mr. Higgins appearing on local news, his eyes tired. "We failed Arthur, and we failed Freya. It's time to rebuild trust from the ground up." At home, Freya met with more detectives, reviewing and organizing her father's emails, notes, the results from Dr. Mellor, every threatening message, every receipt. The police had set up regular patrols by the farm, but the air still thrummed with nerves as if the whole world was holding its breath. The wider club community changed too. A handful of Finch's staunchest supporters fell silent, avoiding Freya at the feed store or riding club, but many more rallied behind her, calling, texting, and dropping off casseroles or flowers. "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't know." "I was afraid," one neighbor said, pressing her hand before hurrying away. The new mood brought unexpected strength. Sally and several other riders called a meeting at the club. No staff, just the local horse families. There, one after another, people stood and spoke about the pressure Finch had put on them. Threats, suspicious offers, money changing hands for silence or compliance. A young trainer, her voice trembling, described how Finch had ordered her to falsify supplement records after Arthur's death. "I couldn't sleep for weeks," she admitted, "but seeing Freya stand up made me realize I couldn't keep quiet." The meeting ended with hugs, tears, and a promise. Never again would they let one man control so much through fear and manipulation. Yet for all the progress, tension lingered. The police presence was reassuring, but Freya knew some of Finch's business partners were still out there, angry at having their dirty dealings dragged into the light. One night, she found a strange car idling on the lane, headlights off, engine rumbling. It pulled away as she stepped outside, her phone in hand. Later that night, a hang-up call came at 2 a.m. She lay awake, listening to the old house settle, the barn creak, shadow shifting in his stall. But she refused to be chased from her home. D.I. Vance called her every morning, calm and steady. "We're nearly there, Freya." More witnesses? More evidence? The judge is moving the trial up. Finch's lawyers know he's cornered. "Thank you," Freya answered, each time a little stronger. The day of the trial, the village felt as though it held its breath. Reporters set up outside the courthouse, their breath fogging in the cold air. Inside, Freya walked past Finch for the first time in months. He sat between his lawyers, no longer confident. His gaze darted away, lips pressed thin, the trappings of power stripped away by the truth. The prosecution called witness after witness, Dr. Mellor, who testified to the sedative found in Shadow's blood and supplements, Mr. Higgins, who admitted his failure to listen to Arthur's warnings, riders and trainers, confessing to years of pressure and deceit. Each voice was another crack in Finch's crumbling facade. Freya took the stand. She felt her father with her. Every word she spoke was anchored in his honesty, his legacy. She described the weeks before the accident, her father's growing anxiety, the threats, the coded notes, the evidence she had gathered. Arthur would never have endangered his horse, she said, or anyone else's. He knew something was wrong, and he tried to stop it. She described finding the hidden phone, the audio files, the messages, the late-night visits from Finch. "I never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth," she finished, looking the jury in the eye. The courtroom was silent. Even Finch's lawyers had stopped shuffling their papers, realizing the tide had turned. The jury returned quickly, guilty on all charges: fraud, evidence tampering, conspiracy, animal cruelty, and manslaughter. The judge's words echoed in the hushed room. Your greed and threats destroyed lives. The community's courage brought you to justice. After the verdict, Freya stepped outside into a cluster of waiting friends, club members, neighbors. Many wept openly. Some hugged her, some just nodded. Each gesture, a quiet apology, a silent promise. Back at the farm, she let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like years. The weight of suspicion, the shadow of doubt, all of it was lifting. The next day, the club held a meeting in Arthur's honor. They hung his photo above the mantel, organized a memorial ride, and announced a new scholarship for young riders, the Arthur Ainsworth Award for Integrity. "He would have liked that," Sally said, squeezing Freya's hand. Freya nodded. "He'd say the real victory is in never giving up, no matter what." The house filled with flowers, thank you notes, old friends dropping by with food and memories. The farm itself seemed lighter, fences mended, shadows receding, the air carrying laughter again. Shadow, once the center of suspicion, was now a local legend, visited by children and praised by riders. He stood by Freya in every photo, his trust in her as unshakable as ever. Yet, when Freya lay in bed, listening to the sounds of the house and the steady rhythm of Shadow's breath from the barn, she knew the journey wasn't truly over. There would be scars on the community, on her heart, on the legacy Arthur left behind, but there would be healing too, and hope, and a fierce kind of pride. "We did it, Dad," she whispered into the darkness. "You can rest now." Outside, the fields glimmered under moonlight, the farm safe again, the truth shining clear and unstoppable, ready for whatever the future would bring. The weeks following Finch's conviction unfolded with a peculiar quiet. The village returned to its daily rhythm, horses in fields, children rushing down narrow lanes to the village school, riders exercising in the dawn light. Yet a hush hung over everything, as if the land itself was taking time to heal. Ainsworth Farm, too, was changing. Where once it had been the center of grief and suspicion, it was now a place of new beginnings, though the past still echoed in every stone and shadow. Freya spent her days repairing what had been broken. She mended fences along the property line, replaced slats in the old barn doors, and swept years of dust from Arthur's study, letting sunlight finally spill across the battered desk. Neighbors stopped by often, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting on the porch, the conversation gentle and free from the sharp edges of doubt. The sense of community was different now, not built on tradition or habit, but on hard-won trust. There was still tension, quiet threats from a few of Finch's old business partners, a strange car passing slowly by the lane one evening, a hang-up call in the night. But Freya no longer felt afraid. D.I. Vance checked in regularly, the police still patrolled, and the club's new leadership had made it clear that no more secrets would be swept under the rug. One cold morning, Freya opened a letter addressed in formal script. It was an invitation to attend the sentencing hearing at court, along with an official statement. Your presence is requested as the community honors Arthur Ainsworth and recognizes the role your family played in uncovering the truth. Freya's hands shook as she folded the letter. She knew she had to go, not just for herself, but for Arthur, for Shadow, for every person in the village who needed to see that courage could still matter. The day of the hearing was gray and wind-bitten, the courthouse standing silent and watchful as people filed inside. Reporters gathered by the door, but this time Freya held her head high, ignoring the questions. In the gallery she recognized familiar faces. Sally, Mr. Higgins, neighbors, even some who had once whispered the worst about her father in Shadow. There was no room for grudges now, only relief and a strange sense of unity. The judge's words were clear, measured, and unyielding as winter frost. Alastair Finch, you are sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy, fraud, evidence tampering, animal cruelty, and involuntary manslaughter. Your actions brought harm to good people, but the courage of one family and the honesty of a community has restored justice. Freya felt a wave of emotion, sorrow for what had been lost, pride in what had been saved, and hope for what was yet to come. When the sentence was read, a hush filled the room, and for the first time since Arthur's death, she felt that a door had closed. Not in finality, but as the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Afterward, the club held a memorial service for Arthur. The hall was packed, riders in their show jackets, neighbors in worn coats, children clutching ribbons. There were speeches, yes, but mostly there were stories. Of Arthur's gentle patience with nervous colts, his laughter on cold mornings, the way he would always stop to help mend a broken gate or lend a listening ear. The club president announced that a new scholarship would be created in Arthur's name, offering young riders a chance to learn not just horsemanship, but integrity. Sally found Freya in the crowd. He'd be proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. You never stopped fighting for him, or for Shadow. Freya managed a tired smile. I just wish he could see it. But in her heart, she felt her father's presence, steady, warm, and proud. The next week, Shadow was officially cleared by the governing body. The club sent an apology, and his name was restored to the record books. Reporters came for photos. But Freya refused publicity, choosing instead to throw the barn doors open to the village children, who lined up with carrots and apples, laughter echoing through the rafters. For the first time since the accident, Freya allowed herself to dream of the future. She made plans to reopen the farm as a small training stable, one built on trust, compassion, and a promise to never turn away a horse in need. She reached out to local trainers, inviting them for coffee and conversation, and found that many shared her vision for a kinder, safer community. One evening, as the sun set in golden bands across the hills, Freya saddled Shadow and rode out across the fields. The land was soft beneath his hooves, the air alive with the promise of spring. She remembered riding here as a child, her father's laughter beside her, his voice urging her to look up, to see not just the obstacles, but the path beyond. As they crested the highest ridge, Freya paused, breathing in the wide, clean air. She let herself think of Arthur, not as a loss, but as the beginning of everything good she'd carried forward. "We're safe now," she whispered to the wind. "I kept my promise." Shadow tossed his head, ears pricked to the horizon. Together, they stood in the fading light, two survivors, wounded, changed, but unbroken. The world was quieter now, but in that quiet was a fierce, steady hope. Back at the farmhouse, the lights glowed softly, the kitchen filled with neighbors' voices, the table spread with food and laughter. For the first time, Freya felt the balance shift from pain to peace. She knew there would be challenges, setbacks, doubts, moments when grief would rise again, but she also knew she wasn't alone. The past would never fully leave Ainsworth Farm, but it would not control the future. Arthur's name would be remembered not as a cautionary tale, but as a beacon of honesty, courage, and resilience. And as the last light faded from the sky, Freya smiled. This is our new beginning. The story, at last, was hers to tell.